The first step in our panels for our Chinese lanterns is to measure in 1 inch from both the left and the right hand sides of your watercolor paper. Okay, so you want to make sure your paper is portrait, not landscape, and we're going to measure in 1 inch on both sides. Now, if your ruler does not start at the end, okay, if there's a little bit of space before you see the 0, make sure you line 0 up at the edge of your paper, and you're going to put a little tiny hash mark at 1 inch. You're going to move your ruler down and do the same thing at the bottom. We're going to flip our ruler and we're going to extend that line to the top and bottom of the page. Okay, we do 2 hash marks to ensure that that line is parallel to the edge of the paper. Okay, I'm going to move my ruler over to my right hand side. I'm going to measure in 1 inch up top, put a little hash mark, and do the same thing down towards the bottom. And again, these lines are going to be extended all the way to the top and bottom of your page. Okay, our imagery is going to be on the interior here. You do not need to worry about anything on these 1 inch margins for now. Okay, you should go through the reference packet and I want you to think about what types of images work well together. You're going to create an interesting composition, okay, of different images and different characters. So if you look at this here, we have a completed panel. Okay, we have use of characters and we have images that work well together. Okay, I do not want to see random things, and I do not want to see little teeny tiny illustrations with tons of negative space. You should draw large and take up the majority of this space on your panel. All right. So the first thing I'm going to show you how to transfer is the characters themselves. Now, if you want to go ahead and draw these freehand so they're nice and big, go for it, all right? But some of you may want to trace them to ensure that they are accurate. So what you're going to do is you're going to take your tracing paper, all right, and you are going to trace right around the edge of whichever character you want. You may choose to then also write the English translation somewhere on your pattern, somewhere on your panel, sorry, but that's up to you. If you want to just have the characters themselves, that's fine. All right. So I've traced over those outlines here in pencil. It is very, very important that you use pencil for the tracing process and nothing else. If you use a marker, if you use a pen, it will not transfer, okay? You must use pencil in order to transfer, okay? So what I'm gonna do now, I'm gonna take another piece of paper, okay? I'm gonna flip my tracing paper over, so I started like this, okay? So it matches here, it's the same direction. I'm gonna flip it over to the back of the tracing paper. Now in pencil again, I am going to trace over the lines that I drew. Okay, so you're gonna have pencil on the front and back of your tracing paper. Okay, you really wanna make sure that you go right over those lines that you drew. Okay, the more accurate you are in this stage, the more accurate your illustrations will be. Okay, so this again is the back of my tracing paper. Now to transfer it on to my watercolor paper, the panel that I'm actually gonna be using, I'm gonna flip this back over one more time. So again, if you look at this here, here's the initial image. Okay, I chose the character for beautiful, and you can see that my illustration on the tracing paper is the same direction. So you can double check that before you put it onto your watercolor paper. Okay, so with my paper, the correct direction, all right, I am going to place it where I want it to be on my watercolor paper. Okay, and again, think about the composition, think about the layout. Okay, actually, the more I think about it, I'm gonna actually move it down to the bottom down here. All right, and I'm going to now for the third time go back over my pencil lines. Okay, so you're gonna press nice and hard And the lines that are on the back of your tracing paper will be transferred right onto the watercolor paper. So again, it's extremely important that for the characters, you trace it once, you trace it on the back, and then you flip it over to trace it onto the watercolor paper. So you can see the illustration that's been transferred is a little bit light. So I can just go back in and pencil and kind of just touch up those lines so that they're a little bit more visible, but we will actually go over all of this in Sharpie later. Okay, now when it comes to drawing different images, okay, these are a lot of organic types of images, so it doesn't matter if they're facing one way or another, okay? If you want to make sure that the image does face the same exact direction that you see it as it's presented in the reference package, you're gonna do just what we did for the character. You're gonna trace the front, the back, and then the front again, okay? But if it does not matter which direction it's going to face, okay, I'm going to trace once, okay, and I'm going to really just work on the outlines here, and then I'm going to go back in and put some of these details in freehand, but I just want to trace the main form that we see here. You have creative license. So if you want to change something in the illustration, you absolutely can. If you want to look up different images that you might not see in these reference packages, you absolutely can. You have creative license, okay? So you can add or change whatever you like as long as your images are appropriate and on theme with the objective of the project. All right, so I'm gonna keep it just like this for now, and then I'm gonna, again, go back in and freehand later. So, right now, she's facing the right-hand side, but when I transfer her onto my paper, she's actually gonna wind up facing the left-hand side, okay? So instead of tracing on the back and then tracing on the front again, I am only going to trace on the back directly onto my watercolor paper. Okay, so with this method, there's only 2 tracings of your pencil lines, okay? But again, the image will then wind up being in the opposite direction as it's shown in the reference package. So I'm gonna go back over these lines. Again, you wanna press nice and hard so that pencil transfers. You can see here that my image goes almost to that 1-inch line, all right, but it doesn't actually cross over the line itself, okay? Anything that might be in those margins that we created will not be seen in your final product. So just keep that in mind when you are laying out your composition. Okay, so when I lift up my tracing paper, we're then going to have a transferred image, okay? You can go in and touch up these lines in pencil, okay? But the next step is actually going to be to Sharpie all of your lines, okay? Now this panel definitely needs some more to it. What I might do is have a column of different characters that relate to this image, okay? But I'm gonna hold off on doing that and show you the next step, which is going to be to go over your markings in Sharpie. Okay, so you all have a thin Sharpie and a thick Sharpie, okay? I want to see line variety. So what that means, thick lines, thin lines, calligraphic lines. I don't want to see the same thin line over and over and over in your panels, okay? So when I outline my characters, I'm going to start by outlining them in thin Sharpie. And one thing that you'll see on a lot of the examples is that these characters typically get filled in with just the solid black Sharpie. So that's definitely something that you can do. It's going to make them really pop on your page. Okay, so I'm then going to take my thicker Sharpie and I'm just going to very carefully fill this character in so it has a really nice thick outline. Okay, but go nice and slow. You don't want to lose the integrity of the image itself. We should be able to tell what character it is. All right, okay. Now when it comes to outlining the illustration of the woman here, I'm gonna start with a thin Sharpie and then I'm gonna go in and add thick lines and calligraphic lines. Okay, so thick lines, thin lines, those are very easy to do. What a calligraphic line is, and for those of you who may have taken Art 1 in the past, a calligraphic line, you should know, is a line that transitions from thick to thin. Okay, it's a very flowy line. Okay, it's a smooth transition from a thick line into a thin line. So a lot of these images that we see in the reference packet are very conducive to having calligraphic lines. So as I'm outlining her here, I'm going to start to think about what areas do I want to emphasize with a thicker line. Again, I do not want to see this same thin line over and over all throughout your different panels. Okay, I want to see a very interesting use of line. All right, so I'm going to start to add my calligraphic lines. So if you look at this example here, okay, there are lots of calligraphic lines throughout these fish, throughout these waves that I added. There are these lines that that go from thin into a thick line. It's a nice, smooth transition from thick to thin. All right, so I may do that around some of these curves here, right? I start by just kind of creating an outline and then I'm actually gonna go in and fill that in. You can do it with the thicker Sharpie if you like. I just like the control of a thin Sharpie. It's very important that you're doing all of these outlines in Sharpie. It must be done in a permanent marker, or when we watercolor, your lines are gonna bleed. Okay, it's happened in the past, and I'm sure it's gonna happen in the future, but I just want you to know you must use a permanent marker, okay? Otherwise, all of your lines are gonna get messed up down the road, and we want to definitely avoid that from happening. Okay, I can go over this one. Thicker line, so you can see I'm starting to just add some different types of lines throughout here to really emphasize certain areas of this illustration. It's going to make it much, much, much more interesting to look at. Okay. Throughout your composition, you can also add other things that aren't in the packets, like I did with the panel here with the fish. These waves I added to fill in some of the negative space. So if you do find that you have too much negative space, you can definitely go in and add different things into the background to fill it. Okay. But I want to see an interesting composition. I want to see an interesting use of line, so thick lines, thin lines, calligraphic lines, and I want to see accuracy in your illustrations when it comes to both the characters and the images that you choose from the reference packet. All right, and that's it. The next step I'm going to show you is watercolor, but that's going to be in a separate video.